what's going on in Detroit, and then open it up to questions, ideas that you might have about how we can build this network and this movement nationally and internationally to really bring some justice to the situation.
So my name is Makita. I am a native Detroiter, born and raised. I have traveled and lived in several different cities in the country, and I recently returned home maybe 6 years ago. And when I came home, I was very devastated at what had happened to my city, and wasn't really sure how to help because I was coming home to rebuild my own life. Recently separated from my husband at that time, had 5 small children, and just really needed to rebuild myself. But in the midst of that, of course, things happen with bills and things of that nature. I became a single mother quite unexpectedly. And so it was really hard for me to juggle everything. And I, too, have suffered having my water turned off because I didn't have the money to pay. And it's not so much that I didn't have the money to pay, but Detroit's water system is not set up yet where they're willing to work with you or accommodate you for being able to maintain your water. So if your bill, at that time it was a couple $100, I may have been $50 short, I asked for help and it's like no. Or if you, so it's a pretty serious deal. If you don't pay the whole thing up all the way, then you will go without your water. The residents there are really having to make choices between survival needs and paying their water bill. And it really disturbed me at the time because if I had an AT&T bill or a Verizon bill, I could call them and say, hey, I need to make arrangements to keep my phone on, and I could get that courtesy. But in Detroit, you cannot get that courtesy when it comes to utilities. And so I decided to join with Justin and a couple other people to start this Detroit Water Brigade because I really feel it's important that we are handling things on the ground. I am active in my community in Detroit through other means, through other ways, and but this particular action to me is the most important right now for me, you know, because I personally know what it feels like to be in a home without water, to feel the shame and the guilt and the hurt that you feel, you know, having to tell your children that there's no water in the home and having to be displaced and do things differently. We borrow water from my neighbor a lot, and he's a retiree. He too is on a fixed income, but he was nice enough to help us and really just making those adjustments. So we made it into a positive because we need these survival skills. We need to know how to survive in case of there's no water, but as far as just on a larger scale, it really is a traumatic experience in and of itself. If you live in a country where it's kind of customary, then yeah, it makes no difference. But when you live in a country where it's free flowing and you personally are denied, it gives a whole nother context to the experience. So that's why I joined the Water Brigade, because I know what it feels like to need water, to not have it, to be embarrassed, to be afraid to tell people that you don't have your water on, because we live in a society that will judge you and will, you know, persecute you for something like that. Instead of coming together and saying, hey, how can we help you get that water back on? You know, Detroit is not built like that. So, so it makes it very difficult. But the Detroit Water Brigade is doing excellent work in terms of getting water to families who need it. No questions asked. You don't have to fill out paperwork. You don't have to go through a whole bunch of changes. You need water, you get it. And that's what I really appreciate. I'm the creative director for the program, so I use my education and my experience to really move this movement in a way that's going to be positive and uplifting, giving compassion and giving hope to those that need it. So it's really a mindset that we're working on as we're doing this water work. It's really in Detroit. It's really about helping people understand that water is life, and that through, you know, providing that or being that source of life for people in Detroit, that they can have the hope that they need. We're really depressed there, you know, really just heartbroken about a lot of things, and really unexposed to a lot of things that's happening in the rest of the world, you know. So it's just about opening our minds there, really broadening that perspective, and we're hopefully doing it through the Water Brigade and through this movement of water, and really helping people to understand thoroughly that water is life, that everyone deserves it, that they need it, and that it's necessary. My passion is the mamas with babies, an elderly that's, that has to decide between medication and water. I mean, really, that's my passion. That's really what, and the young people and social media and really getting that whole movement going. In Detroit, if your water is shut off, we'll talk about that later. You want to talk about it now? Okay, later is fine. All right, so that's pretty much all I have to say right now. Go ahead.
Hi everybody, my name is Justin Wiedis. I was born on the other side of 8 Mile at Peace. 8 Mile is the dividing line between the city of Detroit and the suburbs. And as many of you know, Detroit experienced a huge amount of what's called white flight, or people moving out of the city. It's been happening for many decades now. Wealthy people with money have been moving out of the city, and it's created and it's exacerbated a lot of really serious issues in the city, not just economic, but cultural issues around racism and segregation, one of the most segregated cities, if not the most segregated cities in the country. And so I think just the fact that we're doing this work and we're trying to bring everybody together around this vital issue is evidence that there is a young generation in Detroit that's trying to overcome, to uproot the racism and the long-standing dysfunction of cultural dysfunction and economic dysfunction of our city, of our metropolitan area. It's an ambitious goal, and we're not going to fix it all in one day. But I think water may be the issue that brings us together. And so I grew up in the suburbs, a very privileged, comfortable life. I knew something about what was going on in the city. I learned at a very young age about poverty, but I didn't really experience it. I just saw it through the work of my parents, who are both involved in what I would consider forms of social justice more within the system, but trying to bring justice to a very, very unjust situation. And then when I graduated from college, I moved to New York to become a teacher. And I taught in Brooklyn. I taught young dropouts, kids who had dropped out of school. I taught physics, I taught science, I taught computers, all these things. And I, again, got to experience a lot of what it's like to be young and low income in this country. And it really opened my eyes to how much more we could be doing to really not just raise awareness about this, but confront it and tackle it. And so after 3 years in New York, because of the budget cuts and the financial crisis, I was essentially laid off as a teacher, which again got me thinking, well, how is it that in the richest country in the world they're laying off teachers? And so I began to protest and organize with other teachers and students and parents in order to fight for fair education funding, for more resources for schools, so that teachers wouldn't have to pay out of pocket for school supplies, just basic things like that. And it was through that work that I got to meet the people that ultimately organized Occupy Wall Street. And so with a crew of us, a small crew that began to meet in the summer of 2011, we put together this occupation and really, I think, ripped open all of the sort of latent, beautiful resistance that exists in this country of people of all ages that are just fed up with the way things are and want to do something about it. And so that rupture, that moment in October, November of 2011, inspired me to want to take this deeper. And part of that meant going back home and confronting poverty and racism and gentrification and all of these things in my own hometown. And so I came back just recently to Detroit, and the first issue that I really wanted to jump into was the water issue. And so for a few months before then, in March and April, the water department had started to ramp up its shutoffs program, aiming to turn off, or threatening to turn off, up to 150,000 accounts, water accounts, about 90,000 of those residential. These are people that owe as little as $150. And meanwhile, there are businesses in the city, corporations, stadiums, even the state of Michigan, that owe tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. A golf course that owes $500,000 in water and sewage fees, and they're not getting their water shut off. So it was a very I think, inhumane policy. It's regressive, it's threatening, it's intimidating, it's bullying, and ultimately it's ineffective, because if you can't afford to pay your water bill, shutting off the water is not going to make you able to afford to pay your water. And so I really wanted to jump into that full steam, but I also recognized that there was a need for immediate relief. That while we were advocating and fighting for the policy changes that we needed in order to end this war on the poor in Detroit, we had to provide immediate relief. And I had some experience in that from Hurricane Sandy in New York when I helped to organize Occupy Sandy, which was a grassroots relief network in New York comprised of over 70,000 volunteers that we rallied in 2012-2013 when Hurricane Sandy hit. And so we used a lot of the same tactics and strategies, really mobilizing our networks. The Occupy Detroit network was pivotal in this, and many others, in really just using the existing sort of solidarity and support networks that existed in the city to get water to people, to get out into the neighborhoods, canvass, talk to people about this. You know, we may assume just because we are in the know about news and such that everybody knows what's going on. And in fact, many Detroiters don't even today know what's going on with the water situation. They hear through the grapevine that a neighbor or a friend or a family member has been shut off, but they don't necessarily know the magnitude of it, and they don't know the potential consequences of it, which we'll go into more detail. So really in the beginning it was about awareness, raising consciousness, and also getting water immediately to the people that needed it. So we set up this Amazon wedding registry, which we had done during Sandy, and people could donate water directly, either in cases of bottled water or jugs. We're now moving towards more sustainable solutions, so coolers that people can fill up at houses and take to people who don't have water, large jugs and carrying cases. Ultimately, we'd like to have rainwater barrels for rainwater collection, filtration, gray water systems. There's a whole environmental component as well, which we're just beginning to delve into. But I would say that there has been really a movement emerging around the water issue across many organizations, many movements, and it's very inspiring to see people all around the country, all around the world, showing support for Detroit at this time, because I think, as that piece said, there's a deficit of hope in Detroit. People have become hopeless, and I think without hope, there's really no hope for the future of Detroit, because people just don't see a way out of the slow decline in the quality of life and all these things. And the last thing I'll just mention briefly before I want to let Epis talk a little bit about sort of what we're doing, specifically day to day, is there's an element around economics here that I think is really important, and it's connected to the work of Occupy, the Occupy movement, and really confronting the banks and the corporations that have exacerbated, if not outright caused, these problems. And so the connection here that's important to understand is that, Detroit is the largest city to ever enter into bankruptcy. And the bankruptcy was not brought on by some, democratic process where the people of Detroit got together and said, we're going to solve our problems. It was imposed by the state of Michigan, by our Tea Party Republican governor, who appointed an emergency manager to run the city of Detroit. Completely undemocratically, nobody was consulted, and really it's just a complete affront to any notions of democratic self-governance. And so right now, the vote doesn't matter in Detroit. The city council, the mayor have no power to administer the city. It's a completely dictatorial situation. And so within that context and the imposed bankruptcy, we have a situation where the state and the emergency management team have been piece by piece parceling off some of the most important resources of the city, whether they be land or public services. Just recently the ambulances were privatized, the ambulance system, the parking, the public parking systems are being privatized, the lighting systems are being privatized, and ultimately they would like, I believe, to privatize the water system as well. And Detroit serves an essential function for all of Southeast Michigan in that it provides water from the Detroit River, which comes from the Great Lakes, which is 21% of the world's freshwater, surface freshwater, is in these lakes. So you can see, private corporations all over the world salivating at the thought of getting at this water and bottling it and sending it around the world. In that context, we have to fight back against privatization at the same time. And finally, the element of debt is in there because it's a bankruptcy, the city of Detroit has unsustainably high debt levels. And these debts were accrued during administrations that are now sitting behind bars. We have the former mayor, Kwame Kilpatrick, who's now behind bars. The former director of the water department is also behind bars. And yet we're being told, not just told, but we're being forced to pay off these debts that were accrued by people who are known to have corrupted the system and taken advantage of taxpayers. And so, not just calling for an end to the shutoffs, that's our first demand, but we're also calling for debt forgiveness, so that the $6 billion that the water department and ostensibly us owe be forgiven, in part or in full, and that these debts not be passed along to customers who can't afford them themselves. Because when you go in and shut the water off on a family, essentially what you're saying is, we owe this money to the banks, and now you owe it to us. And if a family can't pay it, they have to go borrow it from somebody else to get their water back on. So now they owe somebody. And handing off this debt like a hot potato is exactly what caused the last subprime mortgage crisis. It's this same issue of trying to socialize the losses and privatize the gains of a broken economic system. And so there is this economic element in here that I think needs to be addressed very seriously. The last thing I'll say on that point is that if it isn't already apparent to you that there needs to be debt forgiveness, consider the fact that 45% of the revenue generated by the water department, and it is a revenue generating department, it's essentially the only revenue generating department in Detroit right now. Every other department doesn't generate revenue, it loses it. But the water department does generate revenue, and 45% of it goes directly to banks to pay debt service. So if your family was in such debt that you had to pay 45% of your earnings straight into interest payments on credit cards and mortgages and all these things, that would be considered an unsustainable situation, and you would have to be forced into bankruptcy. The same thing is happening here, but the city of Detroit, under emergency management, has decided that the revenues from the water department are sealed and safeguarded from haircuts, from any kind of adjustments, in other words, forgiveness, that may happen during bankruptcy. They're called special revenue. And again, this is nonsense, and it's only through the corruption of our local and city and state government, by corporations, by these financial interests, that we're even in this situation where they would not even consider forgiving these debts that are clearly junk. They've been labeled by rating agencies as junk debt. They're not even anticipating that people are going to pay them. And yet we continue to live with this delusion that these debts are somehow going to be paid. We're saying we can't pay them, we won't pay them, and we're not going to allow you to shut off people's water and take away their life and essential resource so that some bondholders and creditors can get some money back on some loans that were clearly not right in the first place.
Right.
And so that's the economic element, and I think it needs to always be remembered as we not just advocate, to stop the bleeding, but also to fix this situation so it doesn't continue to happen over and over again. We need affordable water, and we need a just public water system that serves the needs of all Detroiters, and that can serve as a template for public services and utilities across the country. Because this is not just happening in Detroit, this is happening all across the country. California is in a drought right now, so you understand the importance of water. It's an essential human right and resource that we all need. At Peace, you want to talk a little bit about sort of what we're doing on the day-to-day?
Yeah, so we get together, we have a headquarters location, and we have volunteers that come in every day. We have volunteers that come in every day, and we actually, and we even have people come in from across the country, and we want to encourage more people to come and help us on the ground across the country. So they come in, and we give them one of these.
There you go.
And they throw this vest on, and whatever they can do, they get to work. So we throwing bottles all over the place, and to give you a clear vision. So we throw a vest on, and then we have cases and cases of water that people have donated from around the country. and we get a call from someone that says, hey, I just heard that a family or a block, they're shutting off whole blocks, whether you paid or not. So we get a call saying a whole block or a whole family has been shut off, and we rally up our volunteers, who has a car, how many cases, and we get the water to them as soon as possible. And then we also have some activists whose water has been shut off, who's part of this movement. They have become kind of the central hub for their neighborhood, and so we'll deliver water to them. We've also set up a few water hubs at community centers and different locations where people know that they can get water. We make sure that they stay stocked. So that's what we do pretty much on a day-to-day basis. And we're a very brand new, we're a newborn organization, so we still have so many more things that we are working towards. The main thing that I'm looking forward to in the next several weeks moving forward is educating people while we're delivering this water, creating some type of way that we can educate people at the same time and engage them and help them to talk and have conversation and to really empower them in that way, because in Detroit, you know, people don't really talk to each other. You know, we don't commune like we used to. You know, I'm 40 years old. When in the 70s, you know, and 80s, I remember us all on the block, enjoying each other and having fun. And I remember the pulse of the neighborhoods, you know, and the camaraderie. None of that anymore. Dead, gone, like it never existed. And once you, what did it say, divide and conquer? So once you divide the people, they're not talking to each other, they don't know what's going on, they're losing compassion, all of those things, and you pretty much got what you wanted, and you can take over from there. So one of the things that we're encouraging, along with delivering the water, is that we engage people, we get them to talk, we get them to care, we get them to volunteer their time from their home to a neighbor, you know, and really encourage that interaction. So that's something that we're really going to be revving up when we get back to Detroit, is the educational piece and how we can include art and culture, because Detroit is the home of Motown. There's still a lot of wonderful, wonderful creatives there, great creative and arts community. And in anything in history, when there's a major conflict going on, the artists and culture kind of rise to the forefront and give people that voice that they need in a positive way. So we want to encourage the arts and the culture, and that's another piece that we're revving up when we get back to, is how can we create a marker for this thing in music and in culture that will move it and drive it in the ways that it needs to be. And myself personally, I mean, my background, I'm an artist. I grew up, started an actor at 5, and you know, have gone from there. I played the cello. I got a full scholarship to Wayne State as a cellist. Then I left there, joined the military, went to the Navy, did excellent in the Navy. I loved that experience. Left there, went to Temple University for film and media. That was a great experience. Got married, came back home, had a tragedy in my life that kind of put the brakes on everything. But once I started to revive myself, get myself back on track, I went back to Temple to finish my education, and then I got offered my dream job in Boston, and that was to do advocacy work for young girls and to educate them and to help them through their life process around AIDS and HIV. So I left Temple, went to Boston to do that work, and then everything just kind of broke open for me from there. I did a little teaching, and then I started doing some independent artistry work, and before I knew it, Brown University was approaching me asking me to teach at Brown. So I said, sure, I can do that. So I taught at Brown University for 3 years. Arts and education at the same time, so I do feel like I'm very well versed in the ability to do this. And after I left Brown, I started focusing on my family. Moved to Atlanta with my ex-husband, my then husband. Moved to Atlanta. I was a cultural director for the Boys and Girls Club in Atlanta. That was great work. I enjoyed that. Then I left Atlanta, went to Miami. Lived in Miami for 3 years. And again in Miami doing the same type of work, teaching, education, and art, and all of that. And then that's when my marriage started to break down. As my marriage started to break down, that's when I relocated back to Detroit. And so in saying all of that, I know the importance of how arts and education, just from my own experience from traveling the country and working in certain neighborhoods, I have seen and I have participated in how arts and culture have really revived a person or revived a group of people. And so I really believe that that's the most important thing that we can do, only because and this again is from my experience, art, culture, entertainment, fashion, movies, music, these things, people really pay attention to those things. They really are a pulse of this country. Entertainment, art, culture, fashion, you know. So kind of like when we do activist work, we're kind of out here, and then the rest of the world is kind of pulsing around the entertainment, the art, the music, you know. And so my vision is, how can we make what we're doing sexy enough, and the new pulse, and the new through art, fashion, education, because ultimately the work that we're doing is going to affect the next generation. The work that I'm doing, I want to leave a legacy for my children, you know, and so what legacy are we leaving for them, you know? What vehicle or voice do they use? They use social media, they use music, they use art, they use fashion and all of these things. And so I feel like that's a really important component, along with the political side of things, along with the environmental side of things. In order to really make this the movement of our lifetime, we have to really tap into the largest vessel that we have in this country, and that would be arts, culture, and entertainment. So, so that's pretty much my focus on that.
I think we're going to open up to questions that people might have.
Okay, so I have a comment that puts this in a larger context and also a question. One of the things that I fight is fracking, and you may know that fracking each well uses millions of gallons of water. We have a situation here in California that you've noted, a serious drought. Farmers do not even have enough water for their crops. They've started to tap the groundwater. The groundwater is sinking. It's called subsidence. There was an article recently in ProPublica that talked about how we're running out of groundwater in California because small family farmers and residents do not have their water allocation. Yet the frackers and the Brigade people, like, and I'm going to talk to you about this privately, Fuji Water, I know where they live, the Resnicks, they have these almond farms, these pistachio farms, you know, they are growing very water-thirsty crops in the desert. So there's no water management. They're talking about in the state starting to create water management.
To advocate or rally for changes in the law, you have to change the culture as well, so that people begin to understand that this is my city, and I have the right to say how it's run. You know, my voice should be heard in these discussions. People, unfortunately, have become so either afraid because of the huge amount of repression, whether it's the police or or the private police that we now have in the city, unaccountable private police, or the state police or whatever. Either the repression and the fear, and also just the disillusion of having your vote taken away. It's very difficult to convince people to vote to get their vote back, because
Right.
they've lost their vote. You know, so it's very disempowering. And I think that the culture and what and peace brings is really important to reinvigorating a sort of civic spirit in Detroit, because it has been quashed for the most part. All of those things I think need to happen, and the water issue may be the unifying, rallying issue that's going to bring people together to finally realize that if they can shut off our water, they can just kill us outright, and we have to stand up and do something about it. So that's
And
my
that may be the next, you know, this just may be the precursor in their minds to doing that very thing, as far as just exiling a whole bunch of people.
Have you
But
approached Eminem? Eminem?
no, I have not approached Eminem. I'm being very selective in who I approach. I am approaching celebrities, and certainly ones that are from Detroit. But I want to make sure that they have a heart and a passion for this, and that this is something that they really feel is important. I haven't reached out to Eminem. I do have contacts that can, so he's definitely someone, because he's a Detroiter, I'm going to reach out to him, but I don't want to just reach out to him because he's Eminem. You know, I want people that really are in this for the long haul, that are not doing it for their own personal gain, so to speak, and that really understand the importance of it. So I'm going to be screening the people that attach themselves to this, because, you know, it can turn out to be you know, what do you say, a blessing and a curse if we don't necessarily make sure that the people that are involved in this, especially because when you deal with entertainment, that's a whole nother beast. That's a whole, y'all know, y'all in California, it's a whole nother set of individuals, and a lot of them will come across as if they're very supportive and da-da-da-da-da, but really they're doing it for their own egotistical reasons. And so, you know, me being the professional that I am, and with the experience that I have and the team of artists that I'm working with in Detroit, we're going to be very clear, you know, about what this is and what this is not. So, but yes, we will be checking on it.
Yeah,
Other
Michael Moore.
questions?
Huh?
We want to move on and make sure everyone has a chance to ask questions. We can talk individually. Yeah.
I have a question. How many people Waters has actually right now at present have no water? How many families are we talking about?
The water department has been very hush-hush about their records and things of that nature. And then when you couple that with the level of shame that is attached to it, and we didn't make this point, but we need to make this point. In Detroit, I'm not sure about other states or other cities, but in Detroit, when your water is shut off, there are dire consequences. And so, you know, one of those consequences, the main one being that you lose your children. So if they come and shut your water off, I believe it's within 72 hours, the state can come behind them and come take your children because it's considered unsanitary environment. The other thing they can do once your water is shut off is they can evict. Yep, they can evict you from your home immediately, and they can tag your home as condemnable. So right there, you've lost your home. And then if you have elderly in the home or disabled individuals, they become a ward of the state. So it's more than just about money and water, and that's what we need people to understand. It's not just about we want money or we're going to shut your water off. No, this is a very strategic, you know, forum. So as far as how many people are without water, we really don't have an exact number because between the water department and the citizens, nobody's really touched. We know there's tens of thousands, I'm sure. You know, but the exact number we have no clue. And then based off of what the city's goal has been to shut off 40% of the city by the end of the summer, that lets us know that they're, you know, and then some organizations, there is an organization in Detroit, We the People, they do a lot of canvassing around this issue where they're going door to door and they're actually engaging. And in the months that they've done this, they're finding out that there's people who've gone 6 months to a year without their water. So you know, we have to open the lines of communication up way wide to really get a clear picture.
Question, yeah.
Well, don't people ask themselves sometimes if there isn't a method to their madness? Maybe they don't really want all these poor people living in Michigan anymore. Maybe they would just as soon remove the burden from their tax rolls and encourage those people to get out to Texas or somewhere where there's supposedly jobs or something. They won't be a drain on the state.
Oh, for sure. That's definitely the motivation. I mean, the foreclosures was a sign of that. All of the abandoned neighborhoods that are in Detroit is because of a lot of the foreclosures and a lot of the jobs being lost. And so that was definitely a strategic move also. And it worked because now the city is super downsized from what it used to be. You know, so that's definitely at least one of the motivations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read in it was the Washington Times. There was an editorial kind of contesting the idea that any of this was racist. They called the people freeloaders and
Which people?
Right.
the people who are without water and are poor, and that they're looking for, you know, a free handout. Now you mentioned earlier that you live in a society that persecutes you for being in this situations. I just want to know, just in Detroit, what kind of, have you experienced any sort of like backlash or this kind of reaction for just trying to get water, where somebody's now trying to use this argument of freeloaders or people who want something for nothing?
Detroit is an 85% African American city. And there's other cities within Michigan whose finances are just as messed up as ours. There's a particular, for anybody to sit here and say that it's not, racism has something to do with it, I believe is a delusional, because it's very clear, in my opinion. As far as the backlash, I'm not really sure what you mean by that.
I can address that.
Go for it.
So the question of the freeloader, right? This is I think a frame that the media, especially the right-wing media, would like to use in Detroit to try to contextualize the situation in a way that doesn't really make it apparent what's actually going on. So you say they'll say, and there have been many editorials in the Detroit News and Free Press that say, this is not really about shutting the water off on poor people. This is about ramping up enforcement because there's become a culture of people not paying for their water even though they can afford it. And that's just pure nonsense. The reality is that it's totally unaffordable. The water rates in Detroit have gone up 120% in the last decade. Water is twice the national average cost to Detroiters in comparison to the national average, twice the cost. You've had a system where, and this, both sides agree on this point, because of the mass movement of people out of the city, whether it was forced through gentrification and eviction and other, or just people left of their own accord, there has been a huge revenue decrease in the department. People have left, and so they're not paying water bills. Meanwhile, the fixed costs of the water department remain the same. And oftentimes there's water still running in abandoned houses. It's flooding basements.
And that's
So
what we're
this,
paying.
this is very wasteful, right? The system is antiquated. It definitely needs capital improvements. But again, if you're spending half of your revenue paying debt service, you can't keep up the system.
You need a
And
public
so-
bank also.
That as well. But so the point I want to make is that because of these declining revenues, declining population, it does transfer the responsibility onto those who stay in order to make up for those revenues if the costs of the system remain the same and if the department continues to go into debt in the way that it has under these past corrupt administrations. The resolution to that is not to say, hey, poor people, fork over the money that they don't have to pay for water. The solution is make water affordable for everybody, and let's get a hold of the cost of water and bring it down. And there's definitely ways that this can be done. The city spent almost $6 million on its shut-off program to hire private contractors and trucks to go out and shut off people's water. That's $6 million that could have paid the water bills outright
Yeah.
for thousands of families. Thousands of
It's not hard to
families
figure
that they
out.
wouldn't have to shut off with their $6 million shut-off program if they just paid those bills. The other thing they can do is they can challenge the creditors and the bondholders who claim that they're owed all this money.
Right.
Through these credit swaps and all these things. There was $1 billion bond floated in 2010, backed by the Water Department revenues, $1 billion bond for infrastructure improvements in Detroit. It ended up being that $537 million of that bond that was floated went directly to the banks on, again, debt service. So it's like a perfect example of an unsustainable level of debt when you're taking out a credit card to pay the balance on your last credit card.
Right.
It's just a spiraling, vicious cycle of debt that's totally unsustainable. And we're deluding ourselves if we think that by cracking down on poor families that are now going to have to choose between medication and water bill, between food and water bill, choices that no family should ever have to make in their life, that to do this kind of crackdown, this kind of shut-off program, is going to somehow correct the finances of the water department is delusional. And I think the response that we've seen in the city of Detroit is the natural backlash, the natural response to this inhumane shut-off project. And anybody who's trying to confuse the issue by making it sound like these people are able to pay their water bills, they're just choosing not to, and instead buying fancy sneakers or cell phones or whatever, is just delusional. And the fact is that everybody wants to pay their water bill. Everybody wants water in their house. Who wants to have their water shut off? And the idea that there's just been this lax enforcement, and now they have to ramp up enforcement, is, to be frank, bullshit. The fact of the matter is the water's unaffordable, and people can't afford it, and if people can't afford water, you don't shut their water off. You figure out a way to work with them, to get on a payment plan, to get the financial assistance they need in order to continue to have water. And I will not accept any of these freeloader arguments or anything. They're a complete distraction.
What about the golf courses? They're freeloaders.
Yeah.
The state of Michigan, they're freeloaders. Is the Washington Times writing that?
Exactly. I want to also make a point too, is that I personally believe that the water has already been privatized. And why do I say that? Because we're no longer allowed access to the river. So I grew up in Detroit. We could always sit on the rocks at the river and have a good time, and the fishermen could go fishing. And this past summer, that's no more. They have security guards at the river. You can't sit at the river like you used to. They've imposed new laws for the fishermen, where the fishermen can't even get to the water. They have to leave at 10 o'clock. You know, it's all of these different things that are now being imposed over the past few weeks. So my personal belief is that it's already privatized. And they're just trying to get us used to the idea. But I don't know that for sure.
But we'll test it. We'll go swimming and see if that works.
Oh, they will.
Has any city ever or any municipality been had their water privatized in the United States?
Yes, in fact, Pontiac, Michigan, which is just 20 miles or so up the road, had their water privatized about 5 years ago. It was not a good situation at all. It raised the water rates for everybody. The environmental and the quality water control situation becomes totally unaccountable. You can't ensure that people are getting clean, quality water. And ultimately, it just makes sense that if you turn something that was run for no profit into a for-profit venture, that it's going to become more costly because somebody's making a buck. I mean, that's just the honest truth about it. So we're demanding that the system remain public, that it's a public utility, and that we can't afford to hand it off to private companies.
That's the only other company that you know of in the States? Or?
No, there's been other examples. I can't tell you off the top of my head, but there have been other examples of water being privatized.
The other thing I want to share with you also is to maybe clear up. I think every community on some level may have this, but I know in Detroit there are those who don't want to pay. I mean, let's keep it real. There's a small percentage of people that's like, no, I'm going to do my own thing. But to use that as a way, a means of, or use that as the poster child, that needs to be cleared up. Most of the residents in the city either were middle class and working good jobs and doing their thing years ago and then found themselves in this position, or they are individuals who never had a chance in the first place, you know, because they're young and now they're coming into society that doesn't have jobs for them. So it's a twofold thing, but to use those who don't want to pay or those who are into other lifestyles as the poster child for every Detroit resident, or that this is what Detroit is about, is so incorrect. When you come to Detroit and you interact with people, you will see for yourself. These are people who go to school, who work where they can, who are taking care of their families the best that they can, and really doing the best. And that's something that I want to represent. I mean, I was an instructor at Brown University. I'm a veteran. You know, I'm a cellist, an artist, all of these things, and I cannot pay my water bill. And it doesn't have anything to do with me not wanting to pay. I cannot. There's not enough money in the economic system to even afford me and my life. You know, so I can get the work and I can get the job so that I can pay. There's no work there. So, you know, let's be real about that. And I think the other thing that's trying to be swept under the rug is the fact that people not being able to pay their water bill is really the outpour of all of the drama that's happened in the city for the past 10 or 20 years. You know, we've gone from, you know, the mayoral issues, the foreclosures, the bankruptcy with the big three, you name it, we've gone through it. You know, the emergency manager and now the water. I mean, how much more can any society or community take before it's like, ah! You know, so what you're seeing is just is really the result of all years and years culminated together. You know, and they're trying to sweep it under, well, no. And the other thing, too, is that the systems like Justin had mentioned with the water department, electric department, you name it, whatever it is, they're not as organized as they need to be. Their systems don't run as efficiently as other places. And so, but instead of taking responsibility for that, and saying, hey, we need to fix our system, we need to fix our structure, we didn't do what we were supposed to do, but now we will. They're just saying, oh, we're just going to have to crack down a little bit more, we're just going to have to get a little harder on these poor people because they just, and that, you can't, the truth is what sets you free. You can't go do that for much longer. So that's a little insight I want to share with you all.
Real quick, we met a man who had worked for the water department as a city employee for 20 years, had retired, and then had his pension cut last year. And he couldn't afford on his fixed income to keep up on his water bill, which was too much money, and they went and shut him off a few weeks ago. A former employee of the water department.
The water bills went from, what, 2% of your income to now 20%? So that's a huge hike. When I was a little girl, I remember we paid water bills, I think it was every quarter or something like that. But the bill was like $40, literally. And I used to remember as I was growing up, like, oh, okay, my water bill won't be that much when I get a house. And now that's a different story.
Question over here?
Yeah, I had a question. I'm just. Oh no, thank you.
It's gonna cost you one of those fries.
Yeah, yeah.
Just kidding.
They're
You'll get a
mozzarella
brand.
sticks.
Yeah, mozzarella sticks.
Mozzarella stick.
Shit, I'm gonna have to order some of those too now.
I'm curious, like, as far as like the city planning is concerned and stuff, like what I'm from the suburbs from Novi, and I haven't been. I've been here for the last 10 years, and I'm kind of thinking about maybe possibly moving back or getting. Yeah, but I'm gonna come back in September for like a month, and
Look us up.
yeah, definitely. But I'm just curious, like, what are they saying as far as like, what is the city planning trying to do as far as bringing Detroit, bringing commerce back and getting people to move back and use the city and stuff? Like, what are they saying is the answer? Like building
Well, their
shopping,
answer
fancy
is
fancy shopping malls and
pretty
this and
much.
that, and a new stadium,
Pretty
and
much.
that's all I
That's
hear.
their answer.
And like, but it's again disregarding 85% of the population of the
for
city
sure.
and stuff. And how do you kind of get around that? Like, how can Detroit become like a bit more of like a model for a new way to bring a city back? Because that seems like the model for every city. Like, get the poor people out and then put a bunch of fancy stuff that, you know, the general people that were living there can't really afford to participate with.
We have a friend who's working on something called New Work, and this is it was developed I think originally in Germany, but it's this notion that sort of industrial capitalism and finance capitalism as we know it is in its last stage, and jobs are going to look very different in 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
If you think about like the example of Kodak, the great 20th century company that employed 150,000 people around the world, created immense wealth, built middle classes, right? This is real. These are real, you know, value-adding jobs and enterprises. Just recently went bankrupt, Kodak. Its 21st century corollary would maybe be Instagram.
Which has like
Instagram
20
has
employees.
15 employees, makes several people very, very, very wealthy. You know, Silicon Valley has created more billionaires than any other industry in history, but it hasn't employed very many people, right? Only,
Don't need to.
you know, in the city of Detroit, there are maybe 10,000 tech workers, but there's 650,000 people that need jobs, right? And so the tech industry alone is not going to bring wide prosperity to Detroit or to any city. And so New Work is this notion that we've got to fundamentally and radically redefine what it means to have a job. Because people want to work, people want to be productive. But the 9 to 5, the factory line job of the 20th century is just not going to work in the 21st century because, and again, this is even considering under sort of a capitalist model. You know, it used to be that the more employees you had as a company, the more revenue was generated. But now it seems to be the opposite. Facebook generates millions, billions of dollars in revenue, but only has a couple hundred employees if you don't consider the millions of us who run the Facebook factory and don't get paid for it.
Right.
You know, coming back, Detroit. We're going to have to figure out a way to make it on our own. And the cavalry isn't coming. And this is sort of the spirit of the Water Brigade as well. That we've got to figure out how to be productive and to be and to live fulfilling lives and make the things and share the things that we need in order to live without sort of depending upon the corporations and the large finance behemoths that used to have our back when the times were high, but now don't. You can't get a loan in the city of Detroit. This is not possible.
All you say is
So all of
Detroit.
that, yeah.
Well, and
It's a major university right in the heart of the city, and it's very well known. People from all over the world come and study there. And it used to be Skid Row around there, and now over the past maybe 10 years or so, it's been beautified and brought back, and properties have been, you know, changed over. So the idea is that I used to work for a real estate firm, and they explained to me the whole plan of Detroit, right? The idea is that you start at Midtown, right, and spiral out towards the river. So that means everything else in the city that's not towards the river is pretty much considered wasteland. And, you know, when you consider how big Detroit is, that's a huge problem. you know, to just focus on just Midtown and downtown, and everything else is like, you know, whatever. So that's pretty scary. And then it was another point I wanted to make, but I'll come back to it because I can't remember.
I want to raise some environmental issues as it applies to the Great Lakes. I wasn't aware, I knew they had a lot of the world's water in it, but 21% of the fresh water on the globe is a lot of water.
Yeah.
And now, the fracking stuff is rolling right through. That's one of the key places where they're rolling through with crude. And if the Great Lakes get destroyed, you're destroying a lot of water. So it's not even whether it's coming out of the tap, it's whether there's even water. And you also have some of the biggest aquifers in the country are right in that whole general area. So the whole issue of the waterways and through all these cities in America, that these trains now are starting to roll, and the effect it's having on water, to be able to begin to link that with the fact that this is going to be denial of water, and this is a good water that's, and it's an international issue because fracking is all over the world now, and we, unfortunately, are the model for it. And so I want to raise that. But another thing I wanted to raise was the fact that 1,060 cities in the U.S. have signed the Climate Protection Agreement, which means there at least some consciousness or something's gone on there. There's something to say to, it would be maybe something to work on to try to find out the cities around the country that have similar patterns and be able to have set up some kind of network, whether you can do it through your center or on, you know, set up a certain spot that's for information from other states and make the call. Because, I mean, I was on last night, I was just amazed at the amount of information just on Michigan about fracking in Michigan. And it's a lot more than I had even dreamed. And I knew it was in Pennsylvania and through, you know. But anyway.
And we're fighting the fracking, we're winning
Yeah,
too.
and is that kind of part of the Water Brigade
Well,
program?
we work with
or
a
is-
lot of folks that are fighting, like the, I don't know if you're familiar with the MyCats, the Michigan Coalition Against Tar Sands, and the Detroit Coalition Against Tar Sands. They've blockaded trucks, pet coke trucks, all these things, and we're winning on that front. It really is,
Okay.
we're on the offensive right now, and they're feeling the pressure we're bringing.
Yeah. And the only other thing I wanted to bring up, I would like to have, is this the place that people, if they have an article or something they want to communicate with you, they send it to this address?
Our
It's fine.
website.
Your
Uh-huh.
website? Okay.
Detroit Water Brigade.
But we had the city of Los Angeles has sued Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citibank, and now also JP Morgan Sachs, and it's around the violation of the federal fair housing law. And I bet you have federal fair housing law violations right in Detroit because of predatory lending and because of the way, and my understanding from reading some stuff last night, unless I read it wrong, was that there's been a big uptick in the amount of foreclosures right now to put additional pressure on people right now to be making them face not only water, taking off the losing the house right now. And if some of that information could go up there and shared with us, if you get some, and then we try to share some of that, you know.
Let's stay in
Because
touch.
I think the fact that these suits have been filed and maybe with some pressure might be able to
It's a good idea, and what I would like to see is, because there's several organizations in the city that's doing great work on the ground. So I would like to see us link you and anyone who's interested with all of the organizations, not just us. We can all, collectively work together, because I do believe there's an organization working on the, not the fracking, but they're working on the, suing the banks.
Yeah.
It's like a powder keg that, because water is essential. And to shut someone's water off, you shut off life in their home. I mean, you take away what is modern living when you shut off water and electricity in the home.
Yeah, I mean, this whole struggle, over the past few months was really inspired by an act of defiance by a woman named Charity Hicks, who has since passed on. But she stood up to the contractors when they came to her house and said, "You're not going to shut off my water and my neighbor's water." And so that altercation, that incident there, was, I think, the first step in the enough is enough, we're not going to take it anymore fight back, and it's inspired all of us to take action. It's a powder keg. People are angry. We've heard, we're now hearing reports of people, the contractors going to do shut-offs, and the neighbors come out in front of the house and they scare them away. And people have been doing all different sorts of direct
Putting their
actions.
cars
and
over
things.
the outlet so they can't get to
Right.
it. There's a coalition of residents that have band together with water keys. And if a mother with children or elderly person says their water is off, they're going over there and shutting it back on. So people are taking things in their own hands. One of the main reasons why I want to do this work as the creative director is to make sure that the anger doesn't get out of control. Like we need to alchemize that thing and move it around. We don't need it to, because Detroit is a very fiery city. People are very fiery just by nature. And so we just want to make sure that yes, you can have this anger, and yes, you should be angry, but let's do it in a way that's going to be progressive, not regressive.
So
And also,
following up on
and
that,
one more thought on that, sorry to interrupt, but this week we scored a big victory, which is we got the city to halt the shut-offs for 15 days.
Yes.
A 15-day moratorium. Now, of course, they're claiming that it had nothing to do with our protests and blockades and 20 people getting arrested and thousands of people marching in the street and all that stuff, but we know it's really because of the pressure and the heat that we're bringing. We want that ceasefire, that 15-day ceasefire, turned into an enduring peace. And so we're in a reconciliation phase right now with the department. They've contacted us seeking our help and trying to get families on payment plans and financial assistance. We've told them we're willing to work with them so long as they're not shutting off water. The day they start shutting water off again, it's all a wrap and we're back on the battlefield. So I'm really hopeful that in the next 2 weeks we filed an injunction, as I said, a lawsuit in the bankruptcy court to end the shut-offs. 10 plaintiffs who've all had their water shut off are arguing that this is a violation of constitutional rights, human rights, all these things. It's a sanitation hazard. So legal front, protest front, cultural front, relief front, all these fronts are being pushed forward, and we're hopeful that in the next 15 days we can get that extension, we can get that shut-off program halted completely. And if that is the case, we're willing to work with the department, because the alternative to, if we put our heads in the sand and say we're not going to work with you, we're just going to fight you, the alternative is they'll privatize the system. So we want a public system, we want a water department that's functional and works. But it's got to be one that is democratically run, that is accountable to the people, that's affordable for everybody, and that doesn't, out of the blue, say we're going to go and shut everybody's water off unless you pay us now. If you had a tenant, if you were a landlord, and one of your tenants was falling behind on their rent, you wouldn't kick all their stuff to the curb and then say, pay me the rent now and you can bring your stuff back in. Like, no reasonable human being would do that. But this is the equivalent of that, to shutting off people's water and then trying to get them to pay, rather than working with them to keep their water from being shut off.
so follow-up question, I know that Congressman and your Congressman Conyers, right?
Yep.
I know that he's been vocal, we can count on him for that kind of thing. Have officials from other major cities in the U.S., has anyone else said anything? Because certainly, living in the la-la land bubble that we are in here, we don't get real news.
No one does.
Unless something happened in Hollywood, we don't get any real news. So we certainly aren't getting any news on our evening news stations about what's happening in Detroit. But have any officials from any other major U.S. cities said anything about that?
No, but a good way to get them to would be to set up a solidarity protest and go outside their office.
Yeah.
Let them know that you stand with the people of Detroit. We're going to be calling for a National Day of Action in the next month or two, so we'll definitely be in touch. We also want to do a convergence in Detroit where people come out from every state and show solidarity. We need human rights observers to get into the neighborhoods, throw on these vests, just watch what's happening and make sure that people's rights are being protected. We need volunteers to get out in the neighborhood, social workers, legal, any kind of expertise that you might have. All these things are needed. It's a disaster zone out there. It really is. You walk through the neighborhoods and people's rights are being violated left and right and they don't even know it. So there's a need for support on all ends.
Okay, we got 3 people with hands up, so I'm gonna try to help out a little bit. We're gonna start with Les.
Forgive me if you talked about this already and I wasn't here. While Detroit is having its for bankruptcy proceedings and the water's still being publicly provided, what obligations does a public utility have during bankruptcy proceedings? I mean, where supposedly all contracts are negotiable.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and it's really unprecedented. There's really no precedent for any of this thing, because this is the first large city bankruptcy ever. And Peace mentioned something earlier which I'd never really thought about, which is really true, is that it has essentially been privatized in many ways already. Not just restraining the access to the river, but also the department itself underwent some structural changes. Like, for example, it's now run by this board of commissioners, who are all paid, by the way. 10 people who are paid to now tell people they can't have water. You know, those commissioners do not represent the people in any kind of democratic fashion. They come from the financial elite of the city, the same boys club that has been running the city down the drain in every other area. And so there is a sort of unaccountability that's already present within the system. But as a public utility, they do have an obligation to provide water to the residents of the city. And we have to hold them to that standard. And what they're doing right now is violating it.
But even during these bankruptcy for...
Especially during the bankruptcy.
They're still obligated legally to provide water.
Especially during the bankruptcy, when there's such chaos and uncertainty in the city's finances, especially now. You know, Donald Trump went through bankruptcy 4 times. 4 companies that he started went underwater. They never turned his water off. Right? Why should the city of Detroit have their water turned off? Because of financial mismanagement, because of overwhelming debt service, because of the failure of a system to serve the needs of people. This is a transformation that's happening now, and it should be transformational in the positive sense. We should come out of this bankruptcy with people better off than before. That's the purpose of the bankruptcy, to get a fresh start. You don't get a fresh start by turning people's water off.
And they also they laid off a lot of the workers at the water department and hired a private company. So that's another reason why I think it's already privatized, and you know, they're just kind of playing the game until whenever, for whatever
Probably
reason.
think there's a cost savings to do that.
When they called us, they called us to help with this water affordability fair that they're doing next weekend, which we're supportive of, and we want to help get people there. They called us because they don't have enough employees to staff their own payment centers. And it makes complete sense, because they're paying more money in debt service to Wall Street than they're paying in wages to employees. So every one of those, you know, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 checks that they send to JP Morgan Chase is a salary gone for a city worker that could be helping people keep their water. This is the ransacking of a public utility. Slow ransacking of a public utility.
Roger?
Oh, thanks. Trying to glean from what you've spoken about, it sounds as though you're asking a rotten system to become unrotten.
Right. Not asking.
And you're complaining about the fox or the wolf in the hen house having sharp teeth over and over and over again. Have you thought of it? I'm sure you have, but I'm curious about what your answer would be of governing yourselves.
Absolutely.
That's what we're talking
Absolutely,
about.
but it's
No, I mean sincere, and not waiting for another moratorium or so, but actually governing yourselves. You brought up this element of going rural. I mean, it's semi-capitalistic, but it sounds like a wonderful idea. And for you to govern yourselves, haven't you had enough?
Yes, the answer is yes. We want to govern ourselves, but we have created, and not we, but our people before us, created institutions and fought hard for them to make them public to serve us. And so to say now we want to abandon those institutions because the people running them are rotten, I think is a slap in the face to all of the labor unions our ancestors that built these institutions to serve us. So what we want to do is, we want to reclaim these institutions, make them work for us, at the same time as we're developing strategies in order to be more autonomous. One example that I want to give...
Your ancestors were more interested in your freedom than preserving this institution or that institution.
They built them.
They're more interested in your freedom and you maintaining that. Believe me,
I
they're
agree.
much more interested in that.
I agree, but so people would, in the same spirit as you might say, well, just take a bucket and go down to the river and get
We've
your own
heard that
water.
many times.
But they polluted the water. They polluted the water, so, and you can't even get to it because there's private security guards who will arrest you the minute you try to get to it. So what we're trying to do is reclaim land and institutions that bring us the resources that we need. And we're not just doing this by asking others to serve us. We're doing this by building as well. So we have a pilot program the Detroit Water Brigade is working on in one neighborhood of Detroit where we're building a community land trust. We have 12 lots of land that we've purchased from the city, and we are not only buying the land, but the mineral rights under the land, the air rights above the land, all of these things because we want to create a pilot eco-village that has a water system that is self...
That sounds so
And it's
positive.
right in the
Yeah,
heart
that
of
sounds
the
great.
city.
So this is a pilot program that we believe that we can catch rainwater, we can filter it, we can use gray water systems that filter our wastewater and put it back into the earth to grow crops. We believe that we can use rainwater to run our plumbing. We believe that we can catch our stormwater rather than throwing it into a drainage
The
system
snow
that
every
overflows and sends toxins back into the river. All of these things that are not working in the current system, we want to build a pilot in order to come up with alternatives. But at the same time as that long-term project, that long-term vision, there's also a real immediate need to recover and reclaim the systems that our ancestors built and belong to us. They don't belong to some guy appointed by a Tea
I
Party
don't know if you got the
Republican.
option to be sentimental.
All right. It's not sentimental, we're doing it. We're not asking anybody's permission, we're doing it.
Yeah, John?
I guess I am just wondering, like, beyond the water issue, I mean, what is how far are people getting about developing alternatives to the bankruptcy colonial system? I mean, it's not, which is not just Detroit, but I guess Flint and all these other places too. I mean, what, is something percolating to say, well, this is not the answer, and, if there's bankruptcy, it should be still run by local people, or that we shouldn't have bank, I mean, what is the alternative big picture?
One thing that I'll say, and now I'm not speaking on behalf of an organization, I'm speaking as an individual, because this does not necessarily reflect all of the values and the mission of my organization. But I personally am an anti-capitalist. I don't believe in the viability of the capitalist system. I think it's proven itself, and Detroit is a great example, it's proven itself incapable of providing for the basic needs of all people. That said, I do think there's a lot of innovative stuff happening in Detroit today that is in no way capitalistic in the traditional sense, but is hinting at new ways of working. So the new work that I brought up earlier is an example of that. The other day I was joking with a friend because I was trying to get a discount for something in Detroit, and I said I was a nonprofit, and she said, "Oh, hon, everybody in Detroit's a nonprofit." and it's actually really true at a
Very
deep level
true.
that nobody's really making a profit in Detroit unless you're taking money from people and moving it out of the city. And that is capitalism in essence, is taking money and extracting it out of communities and giving it to other people. And so what we want to create is not an extractive system, but one that creates value and sustains life for people within the community. And so I do think that there's a lot of these alternatives being created. I also think that there's a lot of very powerful forces that want to take Detroit back on the road towards the same system that brought it into decay. And those people I don't believe have a viable vision for the future of the city. If you look at people like Dan Gilbert from Quicken Loans, one of the largest providers and really causation, talk about causation of the mortgage crisis, Dan Gilbert has a vision, and others have a vision for the future of Detroit that I don't believe is viable. I believe that the future of Detroit has to be decided by all of the people of Detroit, not just some billionaires downtown. And it's really got to look beyond industrial capitalism, look beyond corporate organizations, and look towards self-sustaining, self-governing networks. A lot of what Occupy, experimented with, I think is possible in Detroit, because you do have people that have hit rock bottom and have realized that the system doesn't work for them, and they don't want to work for it. And that, I think, is
Okay, we're
is
gonna
a
take
moment
one
to
last
change.
question, and then we would like to open it up to see what is it that we can do in Los Angeles to help this organization. So we're gonna.
Yeah, I wanted to just mention that I've been on the LA Food Policy Council for the last 3.5 years. We have a really strong urban agriculture working group. And one of the things that you can consider that would be good for the economy as well as the environment would be bringing back things like pasteurization plants, slaughterhouses. The food system right now is so monopolized by these few big agribusiness corporations that even if you have like a small dairy farm where your cows are grazing on grass and not being given antibiotics, if you don't, these pasteurization companies won't accept your milk unless they own you. So the infrastructure of agriculture, the same thing with growing, if you were cows and you wanted to make meat, you could have a slaughterhouse. I mean, South LA used to be full of that. There was ranches and there were slaughterhouses. So the idea of like land being so cheap right now, if you could start up this, it would help, because right now with the environment being the way it is, we need to be growing our own food, because the cost of producing it and trucking it just uses too much fossil fuels. So the places that are growing their own food, that's going to be where the economic refugees are going to be going to, because, yeah. So that's a suggestion. And then the other thing is worker-owned co-ops as a model. And Gar Alperovitz has written a lot of books on this. And yeah, okay, so the Cleveland model, for instance. I mean, these are all things that can be tried in Detroit, and I think it's really positive, those developments.
We just talked about the worker co-op last night, so we're all on the same page. I do believe great minds think alike. And there's a lot of great ideas out there that we're talking about, that's being discussed, that we're reviewing, that we're going back and forth about. We really need to move that ass. Okay? That's where we're at. No, seriously. That's where we're at. We all have great ideas. We all know, you know what I'm saying, what makes sense, I'm loving it. It's time we move that tail, man. It's time, okay, if that's an idea, then let's talk about, okay, how we're going to put this detail to that detail. That's where we're at in Detroit, okay? Because this is not new. This is not Hurricane Sandy that came in, and we didn't know it was coming. This has been built over and over and over, and now we're no longer at a place where we can just talk about it. We're no longer at a place where we can just share ideas. When you come to the table, you gotta come to the table saying, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. Everybody has to talk about what they're doing about this. This is where we are.
Yeah, well, the food, like the chef Anthony Bourdain just did in his series where he travels across America, he just did something.
He did
with
Detroit, yeah.
And you have that chef, and those chefs love, that's culture to me. The chefs love the locally sourced ingredients, and they actually have thriving businesses right now, so they may be somebody to go to say, wouldn't you like it if you could source your beef from right here in Detroit, or source your milk right here in Detroit? And you may be able to get some like financing from them, or startup, whatever.
There's well, down right by the train station in Slow's Barbecue, and like that person, they're doing like lots of kind of homegrown things and stuff,
I didn't know that. I know
like,
about Slow, but I didn't know they were homegrown.
I don't know where they're getting their food and stuff like that, but
There's a lot of locally sourced stuff going on.
So we know that the battle is a long battle. It's going to be a long fight here from here on. And I know that you guys are going to need a lot of support. What specifically are your greatest needs right now that we can talk about it after you guys leave? In the next few weeks, reach out to other occupiers, and maybe we here in LA can come together. I know I talked to some people in Occupy Venice, and they like the idea of us working together to try to offer you guys support.
Yeah.
But for that to happen, we need to know what is your greatest need.
Yeah. So two things that I'll say right now that are needed. One immediately and one a little bit longer term. In the short term, the Detroit Water Brigade is continuing to provide relief to tens of thousands of families that have had their water shut off or are facing shut off imminently. And we are in dire need of volunteers. We have, if you're willing to come out to Detroit, we can help you find a place to stay for little or no cost. We have relationships with hostels, homestays. You can come out, your food will be taken care of. We have lots, Ed Peace cooks great food. I cook as well. We got hostels, homestays. We'd love your volunteer support if you can make it out. Now, we know not everybody can make it out, and so if you can't, at DetroitWaterBrigade.org, our website, you can donate not just money, but we also have a need for particular things, in-kind donations. And we have a wedding registry set up there, just like we were getting married. But consider it Detroit getting married to hope or something, and you're donating something that it needs to get married. And so there's a whole list on there. Obviously, we won't turn down cash donation. We're definitely in need of that. We are a nonprofit. We're a rebel nonprofit. So we don't play by all those silly nonprofit rules, but we are trying to do something to progress the notion of nonprofits that actually fight for people and not just recreate the problems or propagate the problems. So we're in need of that. And then in the longer term, and this gets to your question, my friend here. What's your name?
Roger?
What is it?
Roger?
Racha. So next month we'll be breaking ground on Detroit's first community land trust. It's a huge deal. Community land trusts, I think, are one of the best weapons against gentrification.
Is that on your website?
It's not up yet. We're going to be putting up a post next week about it.
Sounds so great.
It's, I think, the best weapon in our arsenal against gentrification and for protecting low-income people and residences from getting taken over by developers and speculators, and evictions and foreclosures. We're launching that, breaking ground next week on next month on Detroit's first community land trust, and we're going to be launching a crowdfunding campaign to build this sustainable residential and eco-village within the heart of Detroit that we think can serve as a pilot to show the water department that we're not just complaining, that we actually have solutions to make water more accessible and affordable, and also more environmentally sustainable. So in about a month, we're definitely going to need your support on that front. And then, just continue to raise awareness. This issue 2 months ago was not anywhere to be found in the media. And you had tens of thousands of families in Detroit getting shut off in the dark, silently, and nobody was talking about it. And it's only because of all of the ruckus and the buzz that you have created through social media and the internet and word of mouth and all of these types of reunions and get-togethers that this has become a national issue, an international issue. And so we need you to continue to amplify the messaging that's coming out of Detroit from local organizations like ours, on our Facebook, on our Twitter account, on our website, DetroitWaterBrigade.org, and serve as megaphones, as people's mics for what is happening in Detroit to spread across the whole Occupy movement and to spread across the whole country and the world, and make sure that this stays on the front page, it stays at the front of people's minds as we push into the bankruptcy trial next month. We want the bankruptcy judge said last week, in a very rare sort of unexpected statement, he called on the water department to stop the shutoffs because they were affecting the bankruptcy by creating a very poor international reputation for Detroit. We want to continue to affect the bankruptcy. Anything that we can do to affect the bankruptcy at this point is essential because the economic futures of millions of people are at stake here. We're talking about millions of people, and if we can affect that bankruptcy and continue to make it about water and make it about low-income people and poor people getting their rights violated, all the more likely that we'll come out of this whole affair without an emergency manager and with some justice for people. So please continue to spread the message.
And because if we've made mention about using this as an opportunity for a prototype for a better society and a better community. The other side, our opponents, are doing the same thing. They're going to use it as a model for California later.
Privatization.
You know what I'm saying?
And
So that's the connection that I'm making with people. Like, yeah, it's Detroit today, but it's you tomorrow, sweetie. You know, it's not, and a lot of people think that it can't happen to them, or it's not going to happen to them, or no, that's just Detroit and what they had coming, or whatever the case may be. But believe you me, when a beast starts rearing its head, it's just going to keep on going. It's going to devour everything, baby. So you really need to care. And you know, I've been telling people, like on the plane and things like that, you know, if you don't control the spigot as a public, you know, right, if you don't control the spigot, then they can turn you off whenever they want. It might be Detroit today because of money. It might be L.A. tomorrow because of contamination. You know what I'm saying? So we really have to make sure that we, as the people, are controlling that spigot in some way, a better way.
One of the
By
key
the way, if
things
we
that
don't get involved with the fight for net neutrality, speaking about a public good, if we don't keep the internet in the public commons, all of our organizing will be lost.
Yep.
So
We need that.
this is coming down at the same time, and I would suggest that you can get it together in time to do this convergence right after the People's Climate March in New York.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm going, and a lot of people, this is supposed to be the largest climate convergence in the history of this planet. And people are going to be on the East Coast. I've got to stick around. I've got a week afterwards with nothing to do. I'm coming to help you. But I'm telling you that it would be a good time because people are converging in New York, which is not too far away.
one of the key things, she just touched on one of the key things that we were talking about yesterday, last night, and it also pulls in what Occupy Venice is doing or whatever all the other activists around the country are doing, and more importantly the world too, is that right now Detroit has been sapped of everything that it's possibly had, and the burden has been thrown on the people that are left there. Just as so they're capable of a population of around 2 million comfortably. Right now they're at 600,000. So there's an infrastructure set up, an abandoned infrastructure set up to be able to revitalize a society, which is what they're beginning to do. And I'm taking off to Detroit as well, hopefully within a month or two, something along those lines. But what we have is we have a beautiful, beautiful opportunity that we'd all love to have for our own personal homes, cities, and societies, is we have an opportunity to start from scratch, to start from nothing in a sense. Literally start from the rubble of the system that has destroyed and corrupted this nation and in a sense to the rest of the world from its core. So we are left with nothing in the city of Detroit. And I say we as a country, as a populace, as humanity, we are left with nothing. But because of that, the beautiful work that they're doing is governing themselves as far as handling the water and distribution, and they have water centers and everything else. But it spawns from that. That's what it spawns for. 10 years from now, Detroit could be an epicenter of activism to where you go on tour, you're going to go to do all the workshops possible and see how you could sustain your own society from within Detroit, because that's the model ground right now. So 10 years, it could either be that, or 10 years, it could either be something you just fly over because everything got privatized, everybody finally left the city, and it becomes one of those things that you look at like the ancient Aztec and Mayan pyramids that they discover in the jungle that they didn't know the structure was there because nature took it over. So it's gonna be going in one of two ways. Personally, I love, what was your name, Roger? I love Roger's idea, because that's how I function, that's how I work within my life. They cut the fucking power, I jump back on the pole and I connect the power back up, they can go fuck themselves. The point is, the self-sustainability that we have had for thousands of years as a society of depending upon each other, and we get our chicken from the neighbor and we trade tomatoes for this, that is something that we have lost as with all this modern technology and marvels and all these things that we have access to. We've lost that. We've lost that as a country, because that really hasn't been lost when you go to other countries, third world, second world countries. They still have that sense of community out of necessity. Because we hadn't had that necessity for so many years, we had lost touch with that. So this is a beautiful, perfect opportunity to get back to that. And even if we can't make it all the way out to Detroit, what I want to work with them on is how to get help from outside of Detroit for either micro funding for different projects, Indiegogo campaigns, Kickstarter campaigns, things that will begin to set up that infrastructure within the city of self-governance outside of having to depend on the systems necessary. It's great to have the systems there, but no matter what, I think whether they like it or not, they're going to be going in the sense of self-governance, the people of Detroit, because they have no option. There's nothing left. When you could buy up homes for a few $100, and yeah, you have an issue with weather, but there's greenhouses right there in those homes.
I like what Apis was saying about the, nobody talks to each other. See, 'cause
This is very iconic in the city. It's one of our landmarkers in the city. So if you come and you drive up I-75, it's painted on the walls of the Russell Bazaar by local artists in the city. And this is it. It's a graffiti, and not so much graffiti.
It's enormous.
And it's enormous.
5
Yes,
stories.
I don't know how, yeah, 5
Yeah,
stories
you
wide.
can tell just by the size of the door.
Yeah,
Just
it's
on top of that,
super
that's a 5
big.
story.
Right
Where?
alongside. Huh? 75 and like East Grand Boulevard, where the incinerator.
Cool.
And actually the same building where the shut-off trucks go out.
Yep.
So we want to take that building back.
Are you selling those?
No,
No, we're giving them to
We're
you.
giving them to you, so you'll help
Yes, so
yourself.
take one,
Watch
please.
out, there's water on that table.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Take one and pass them down. That's our gift to you.
Yep, please take one.
Thank you so much.
my pleasure. Thank
Before we
you.
wrap it up, excuse me,
Enjoy.
before we wrap it up, can I have your attention? Okay, we want to make sure, hello everybody? Okay, we want to make sure that if you have a gift today, there's something you could do today to help our brothers and sisters who have traveled from Detroit. You want to write a check today. You want to be able to give a little contribution. I understand they have a couple goodies in there for those people that do contribute. We ask you to be as giving as possible. I know that it's a hard time for everybody, but I think that this is the beginning of something that we are going to start in solidarity with the people and the Brigade, the Detroit Water Brigade. We are going to be doing something more organized to help the people in Detroit. But today we want to show that we care and that we appreciate them taking the time to come here to answer our questions that we have regarding this very important crisis. So I don't know how you want to do this.
We'll start the
Yeah.
bidding at 100,000.
No, we're just so thankful and grateful.
Yes.